So this week, we're going to talk about the reasons why people move to the West. The last few weeks in class, we've looked at the two different regions of the North and the South, and we talked about how the North was all about manufacturing and factories and building things. The South, on the other hand, was all about farming and agriculture, and they used slaves, many slaves, to be able to do that. We mentioned a few weeks ago that the Western region was all about land. It was about buying land, selling land, building things on land, and trying to get people to move west and where that land was. So this week, we're going to look at some of the reasons why people decided to move west. You see, ever since Lewis and Clark had explored the Western Territory, many people had been fascinated with moving west and what resources might lie out there and what kind of things they could find, but they were a little afraid to do so. So the main ways that people traveled west were through these trails that you can see on this map. So the ones that we're going to focus on today are the California Trail, which is this orange trail right here. Okay, we're going to talk about the Mormon Trail, the yellow trail right here. We're going to talk about the Old Spanish Trail right here, this kind of bluish colored one. The Oregon Trail, maybe the most famous, this purple one right here. And the Santa Fe Trail, which is the red one right here. The Butterfield Overland Trail is on this map as well, but we're not really going to talk about that too much today. So, how did people begin to get the courage to start moving west? Well, it started with high hats, believe it or not. The hat that you see in this picture is an example of what some of the high hats were that people wanted to buy, both here in the United States and also in France and England and Spain. And these hats were made out of beaver furs. So a guy named John Jacob Astor really wanted to get more beaver pelts, and he knew that there were lots of beavers available in the West. So what he did was with his fur trading company, he began to move his operation west. In fact, he established a trading center in what is today Astoria, Washington, where he could basically pay Native Americans to once or twice a year bring as many beaver pelts as they could, and he would trade with them for those beaver pelts. Well, once John Jacob Astor and his trading company moved out west, it opened the floodgates for other people that were worried about the dangers to start moving to the west, because John Jacob Astor hired what were called mountain men, who essentially looked for trails and passage from the middle of the United States all the way to the west coast. And he was very successful. These mountain men were successful in finding some of these trails that would end up becoming the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail. And from there, people began to get into groups called wagon trains, and they would begin to move west. The wagon trains were organized in a way where you would have 20 or 30 families together moving west at the same time. And the reason why they did that was because the more people you had together, the less chance you had of being attacked by wild animals or Native Americans, and you had safety in numbers, basically, by having more people. So, what were some of the reasons why people moved to the West? I want you to think about that for a minute, just brainstorm for a minute, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the reasons why people moved west. Well, some of the reasons why people moved west were there was many rich natural resources that they were pursuing, like gold and silver, but they also wanted land. This may be the most widely used reason why people moved west, was for more land. But it was also a mild climate. When you got into areas of Northern California and Oregon, the climate was much different than it was in the Midwest, where you had snow and ice and hard winters. They also were looking for fertile soil. The Midwest did not have the best soil, and they had heard rumors of places like the Oregon Valley, where there was the Willamette Valley in Oregon, where there was very, very fertile soil. And finally, religious freedom was another reason why some people moved to the West, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So, the first trail we want to talk about is the Oregon and California trails. Both of these trails began in Independence, Missouri, and moved west where they split at Fort Bridger. At Fort Bridger, the California Trail went to the southwest into what is modern-day Northern California, and the Oregon Trail continued on to the northwest, where it would end up in the Willamette Valley. So it was about 2,000 miles long, and that's a long way to go, and it would take anywhere from 4 to 6 or 7 months to make this journey. The Oregon and California trails were mostly used by families who were looking for a better life, and as I mentioned before, they would move west in these kind of wagon trains where they would have 15 or 20 families together, all with wagons full of their supplies, so that they could have strength in numbers and be better protected as they moved from one place on the trail to the next. The second trail, or two trails we want to talk about as a pair, is the Santa Fe and the Old Spanish Trail. The Santa Fe Trail began also in Independence, Missouri, and it was about 2,000 miles long if you traveled the whole Santa Fe and Old Spanish Trail together. But the difference here is that this trail was not used by a whole lot of families. This trail was much more rugged, it was much more dangerous, but it was worth the risk to many traders to try to traverse this trail, because they could make a good amount of money if they could take a wagon load of supplies from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe and trade them or sell them and then go back to Independence, Missouri and do the same thing. Or they could continue on the Old Spanish Trail all the way to California and do the same thing. So the Santa Fe and the Old Spanish Trails had more of a southern route in what is modern day United States West. The last trail we want to talk about is the Mormon Trail. And the Mormon Trail was not about families wanting to move west, although it did include families wanting to move west, but that wasn't the main reason. It wasn't about trade and trying to make money, although these folks did want to make money. The Mormon Trail was about religion. And the Mormon Trail didn't begin in Independence, Missouri. It began in Nauvoo, Illinois. And it was all about people of the Mormon faith wanting religious freedom. And Joseph Smith founded the Mormons, and they had settled in different places in the United States, but specifically in northern Illinois. And in Illinois, they felt like they were being treated poorly because of their religious beliefs. And so the Mormons, under Joseph Smith's leadership, decided to move west. And when they moved west, they ended up settling in Salt Lake City. So the Mormon Trail traces from Nauvoo, Illinois to Salt Lake City, Utah, what is today Utah, and they settled there. And there's a large Mormon population still living in Utah today as a result. But their main goal was they wanted to escape religious persecution. And if you don't know what that word means, persecution, it's essentially to be attacked, whether it's verbally or physically, because of your faith or your religious beliefs. And the Mormons were being treated poorly because of what they believed. And so they wanted a place that they could live in peace, just them, without being attacked for their faith. So those are the 5 trails that we're going to talk about: the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, the Santa Fe, the Old Spanish, and the Mormon Trail. So the last thing I want to do for this week is I want you to think about what were some of the challenges that those that tried to take these westward trails, what were some of the challenges that they would face? You know that the reasons why they were going, because of fertile soil and land and mild climate and religious freedom, but what were some of the things that they might have encountered that would have made it difficult for them to make this journey? So these were a number of the challenges that were faced by the people who tried to travel west on these trails. Number one, lack of supplies. If they ran out of water and there was no streams around, if they ran out of food, and even if they ran out of wagon wheels, or their oxen died, there was all kinds of supplies that caused problems for the people as they moved west. Another one was bad weather. If you left Independence, Missouri too early in the spring, it was too cold for your oxen to have grass to eat because the grass wasn't growing. If you left too late, you would face potential snow in the Rocky Mountains as you crossed the Rocky Mountains. And so weather was a major issue. Obviously diseases. As people got diseases, there was no doctors around, and so it was difficult to treat those. Geographic barriers. You had to cross rivers. You had to cross mountains, things like that. Of course, there was wild animals like grizzly bears and rattlesnakes and things like that. And then there was also Native Americans who were not happy about the fact that the Americans were moving into their land, and so that posed potential dangers as well. So all of these were challenges for people that were moving west, and yet, they were still willing to take this chance. Many of those who tried to move west for a better life, they lost family members and they lost friends as they tried to move west to all of these different challenges. And yet they were still willing to try it for a chance at a better life. And so this week, as you work on your assignments, you're going to play the Oregon Trail game, and you're going to use an interactive map with the different trails. I want you to think about the sacrifices that these people were willing to make at a chance for a better life.